Now, I've threatened some people earlier that I was going to bring in some demerit slips from school. Not mentioning any names whatsoever. So we'll get started. Gary, would you mind leading us in a prayer to begin?
Our Heavenly Father, we're so grateful and thankful unto Thee for another first day of the week that we can worship Thee. Our dear Heavenly Father, we ask Thee to look down upon us and help us all to give our hearts and minds to Thee and Thy Word. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so grateful and thankful for Thy Word and for what it means to us. For Thy Son that You sent to die for our sins. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask Thee to continue to bless us. Be with the ones who are less fortunate than us. Be with the sick. The ones that's lost loved ones. Dear Heavenly Father, comfort them. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask Thee to give them strength and guidance to follow Thy Word for comfort. Dear Heavenly Father, we ask Thee to be with Tom this morning, his lesson, to keep him good remembrance of the things he's prepared to say. We ask in Jesus' name.
Amen. Okay. Last week we talked about Galatians 6, chapter 1, Galatians 6, verse 1, pardon me, 1 through 5. And the discussion was about the necessity that as we mature, we're able to bear our own burdens to the degree that we can. We're all finite people. We all have limited strength. We all have limited capacity. We all need help from time to time. But as we grow and mature, we're expected to, not to sound redundant, but grow and mature in our capacity, in our resilience, in our ability to manage our lives. And so he talks about that. But he also, in that passage, talks about the duty that we owe to one another, to bear each other's burdens. So I want to look at the same passage this morning, but instead of the focus on bearing our own burdens, I want to focus today's conversation on helping take care of each other. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest also you be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load. And so last week we talked about how important it is as adults that we grow with that capacity. It says, it begins here, if a person is overtaken in a trespass, let those who are spiritual restore them in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. What he's warning us there about is the very real opportunity that in reaching out to help someone else recover from a difficult past, from bad decisions, from bad consequences, that we get drawn in. And we have to be careful about that. Because frequently, and all of you, I mean, with just a couple of exceptions, I'll say we'll go with three. Three exceptions. I'm scanning the crowd here. We're all adults. And you've lived through a lot of this stuff. And frequently what you've found is that sometimes when there's a person, and you can care about this person deeply, but if their life is in a ditch, they don't want to be out of the ditch so much as they want company in the ditch. Right? And that's the warning here. Considering yourself, you got to be careful. And the way I've described that to my teenage students is if you find somebody in a ditch and they have their hand out and they appear to want help out of the ditch, then reach down and take hold and with all your worth, pull. And if what you find is that they are scratching, clawing, trying, whatever it takes to get out of the ditch, you keep pulling. Call for help. Don't give up. But the moment you sense they're not trying to get out of the ditch anymore, now they've set back. They've shifted their way. Now what are they doing?
Trying to get you.
They're trying to pull you into the ditch. That's when you let go. Anybody here was ever a lifeguard or take life-saving classes? That was one of my high school jobs. I was a lifeguard. You only go in the water as a last result. Because the last thing you want are two people at the bottom of the pool. You have to be careful with that. I'm not saying we don't try to help people. And I'm not saying we don't try to save people. I'm saying that we make every effort, given the opportunity and the resources at our disposal. But there's a reason why the flight attendant tells you to put your mask on first before you put one on your child. And that's where he's getting to here. And then to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. So, what is the law of Christ? Let's turn to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. Let's all go there. Because the context actually starts in verse 23. And Jesus here begins speaking with the Sadducees, who did not believe in a resurrection. You had the Sadducees, you had the Pharisees, and that was the primary doctrinal difference between the two. There were others. It was not exclusive to that one thing, but that was the primary thing. You had some other groups at the time. You had a group called the Herodians, that was more of a political faction. You had the Essenes, who were more of an extreme religious group. For our benefit, they actually preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. But primarily these two groups. And so Jesus begins in verse 23, the Sadducees, with this basis of there being no resurrection, they challenge him. He answers them. In verse 29, you're mistaken because you don't know the Scriptures. So, even if you knew nothing else about this account, but you know that the Sadducees do not believe in a resurrection, that they are challenging Jesus to try to draw him into a verbal trap, if you will. And the very first thing out of his mouth is, you are mistaken, because you do not know the Scriptures nor the power of God. If all you knew was that, what could you surmise with respect to Jesus' view of a resurrection? That he believed in a resurrection. dealing with these people. And him beginning his response with, "You're mistaken." And you're mistaken because you don't know the Scriptures and you don't know the power of God. Now, more detail to follow. But there are people who meet in buildings just like this, who call themselves Christians, who would be essentially modern-day Sadducees. They're mistaken, not knowing the Scripture or the power of God. But then he goes on. Here's where the slide picks up. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees. Now, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were at odds with each other frequently. But they worked together in terms of being opposed to Jesus of Nazareth. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, is the concept there. Shiite and Sunni Muslims disagree about a lot of things, but they agree when it comes to not liking Jews, right? Sadducees and Pharisees disagreed about a lot of stuff. But now the Pharisees see that Jesus in this debate had silenced the Pharisees. They could not answer what he said. So they get together. You can see the Pharisees in a huddle. Mumble, 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 mumble. Okay? What are we going to say? Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, saying, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So, back here, to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. What comes first in following the law of Christ? You shall love the Lord your God. What's second? And your neighbor as yourself. This is where the conversation of bearing one another's burdens begins. Because we have to understand first principles. Everything is built on something else until you get to a foundational basis. Well, where does that come from? Jesus is referring back to a passage in Deuteronomy. Now this is the commandment, and these are the statutes and judgments which the Lord your God has commanded to teach you, that you may observe them in the land in which you are crossing over to possess, that you may fear the Lord your God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, you and your son and your grandsons, all the days of your life, etc., etc. You have to be careful to observe it. Lots of detail in the laws of Moses. You begin with the Ten Commandments, and then you get into all kinds of stuff, right? But this is where it starts. Jesus establishes the first and greatest commandment, and then the second like it. So that gets us to the duty that we owe one another. This was an interesting point to me. Matthew Henry's commentary, and I don't reference commentaries to you guys a lot because I want to stay with what the words say in the Bible. But he talks about this fulfilling the law of Christ obliges us to mutual forbearance and compassion for one another. What are the odds that you're going to exercise, that you or I are going to exercise much effort and expend much energy in bearing the burdens for someone to whom we have no compassion?
Very good.
Limited at best. Limited at best, right? we tend to be willing to share greater burdens for the people that we have strong emotional, psychological, social bonds with. Here's how strong it is. One of the most influential books, okay, let's set the Bible aside before somebody reacts negatively. Take the Bible, set it aside. Books other than the Bible. One of the most influential books I've read in my entire life is a book called Deep Survival. And it's a study of how our brains work. And in scenarios in which some people will live and some people will not live. What's the difference? What are the behaviors that set survivors apart from non-survivors? And that's the title of the book, Deep Survival. The subtitle of the book is Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. Now, obviously, if Bert and I are in the first row of an airplane and it crashes at a 90-degree angle, it doesn't matter what behaviors we demonstrate, right? We have no chance of walking away from that. But if it doesn't do that, if it does this, and there's a chance to get out, some people are going to get out, and some probably aren't.
The ones that look out for each other.
There you go. Within that book, he gives about 12 behaviors that survivors, they don't display all 12, but they'll display a subset of 3 or 4. And he says in the book, the strongest one are people who choose to survive for someone else's benefit. And he uses examples of people who survived places like Auschwitz. That they chose to survive not for their own benefit, but for someone else. And the most powerful story he tells in the book is there were 3 NFL football players and a 4th guy who was a professional trainer. So I say that only to say very fit people, not shaped like me, okay? Very fit. They take a boat out from Tampa, Florida. They head west out into the Gulf. A storm comes up and flips the boat over. Now they're in the water with the capsized boat. It's one of those types of hulls that the boat doesn't sink, so they're holding on to it. But they fail to make their return time. People start to get worried. People call the Coast Guard. The day goes by. The night passes. Another day. The night passes again into another day. One by one, the first 3 let go of the boat. They drift off and they drown. One guy held on to the boat. One guy. And when he was interviewed after the event, he was eventually picked up by the Coast Guard. And when he was interviewed afterwards, what he said was, I watched my friends drift off and disappear. And it would have been easy to let go. He said, but every time I started to let go, I had this picture in my head, this crystal clear vision of my mother standing at my funeral. And I saw the anguish and the pain on my mother's face that her son was dead. And he said, I could not let that happen. I could not put her through that. And when the others let go and drifted away, all I could see was my mother's face and how painful it would be for her to face the loss of her son. And he said, I couldn't let go. And what the guy, and Gonzalez is the author's name, he said what he found in his interviews is that this was a recurrent trend. That people are willing to expend more energy, to commit more cost, to bear a greater amount of suffering for someone else's benefit
You know, it's funny,
than they will for themselves.
that story you told, there's a sports writer, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but he had a rough time, and he had already made plans to commit suicide. And he had the plan and the route and everything, and just by chance, one of his friends committed suicide before he did. And him being that kind of guy, he called his friend's family. And when he called that friend's family's home, and whoever answered, and he could hear the wailing of his friend's family, and he thought just what you just said. He imagined that was going to be his family, and it snapped him out. Just the fact of thinking about what that would do to your family, and imagine the grief that they would be going through. It's interesting.
So, almost all of you know, I'm a dad. Dana and I have 2 daughters and a son. We have 7 grandkids, 5 grandgirls and 2 grandboys. I have a brother and a sister. And here's what I've learned from all those relationships. There's lots of good dads. But when you just look at the raw numbers, just the numbers, not trying to pick this data point or that data. When it comes to how much are you willing to suffer for the benefit of another person, moms have it over dads by a significant factor. Dads will say, get over it and walk away, when moms are hanging in there, right? Because they function differently. Dana and I function differently. When Taylor and Kevin Copeland were fighting in the living room, I just said, take the fight outside. You're going to break something. To which my Sunday school teacher wife said, you didn't tell them not to fight. Nah, they're going to fight one another. I just told them to take the fight outside. Well, are you just going to let them go? I said, no, indefinitely. I'll look out there in 4 or 5 minutes. If they're still fighting, I'll turn the hose on. My point being only, her approach was different than mine. When your kids were up at 3 in the morning with an upset stomach, while there's the occasional exception, for the most part, was it mom or dad up with it? Yeah. For the most part, right? Because they're built more for compassion and forbearance, for the most part. But we have to develop compassion and forbearance for each other. And one of the ways we do that is empathy for one another. I'll just, confess straight up. You get that nature-nurture combination, right? My nature for empathetic capacity is low. And I was raised in a family that my nurture was low. So I'm not very good at it. Dana's the other end of the spectrum on that. What are we willing to do for one another? Here's where it starts. Now, in looking at this, I couldn't get away from verse 4 of our base passage. So let's go back to Galatians chapter 6. Back to Galatians chapter 6, verse 4, or verse 3. Verse 2 is bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. We just talked about the law of Christ, right? To love your God first and foremost, and to love each other second after that. But then he goes on in verse 3. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Maybe Paul had it wrong. Has no one in here ever run across someone who thought they were special when they were not? And you know there's a reason for that? It's very common for us to consider ourselves wiser and better than others. And that gives us an excuse, we think, for not bearing one another's burdens. They deserve that. Whatever. This could be considered the spiritual application of the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with little knowledge or experience in an area tend to overestimate their competence. Tracy, are you familiar with Dunning-Kruger? Tracy, you familiar with Dunning-Kruger?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the curve for the Dunning-Kruger effect. And to me, Galatians 6:3 really jumps off the page when you're talking about this. Because Galatians 6:3 tells us, "For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself." Here's what Dunning-Kruger does. People who know the least about something tend to be the most confident in their assertions and opinions about it. That's why it starts with confidence on the Y scale, knowledge in the field on the X. You start with low confidence, low knowledge. They know nothing about it. So in our society today, what's the first thing a lot of people do to learn something about a topic? They Google it. So they Google it, and they love to use the word research. Oh, I've researched this. So they're about 90 seconds into their study, and all of a sudden they know everything there is to know about it. You run up against this anywhere? Okay? A lot of people quit right there. Because they love that feeling of, I know everything about the topic. But if they learn a little bit more, what happens to their, as you move towards the right on the x-axis, from I know everything, what happens to their confidence level? Because they start to realize, not only do I not know everything, there's more to this than I thought. And then, I'm never going to understand this. But if they stick with it, then it bottoms out, and they start to say, well, wait a minute, this is starting to make some sense. And eventually, they say, I know more, but trust me, it's complicated. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect is one reason why you find, and it's not just our society, but our society is included in this, that people that are largely ignorant about a topic are the most confident in their opinions about it. And the people that know the most about a topic are more guarded in their opinions. Because they've learned, there's a lot here. So Galatians chapter 6, verse 3. If someone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. So if I see Charles struggling with an issue, and all I know is a tiny bit about it, it's easy for me to say, I know everything that Charles needs to know. Here's the thing. Take this bit of pithy, bumper sticker biblical wisdom from me, and I've got places to go and things to do. Go ye hence, be thou well fed and warm. How much have I just helped Charles? None. If anything, I've probably offended him. Okay? Because I haven't taken the time to understand what he's going through. I'm up there at the I know everything. If I'm going to help Charles, what do I need to do? I got to listen. I got to stay engaged. I got to start learning what's going on with him. There's more to Charles' issue than I thought. I stay engaged. Wow, this is deeper and harder than I thought. But if I continue to stay engaged, now I have a chance. Maybe I'm not that smart and I'm not going to be able to get him out of it anyway, but now I have a chance to help. Now I have an opportunity to relieve part of Charles's burden in a way that I never had at the I Know Everything point. Any of you in here been in a position in your life where you needed some help? And you had a churchy people just like us offer you that business that I Know Everything and walked away and did nothing to help you? We probably all have at one point or another. This is another of those bumper sticker things. People don't care how much you know until they what? Know how much you care. And that only comes from being engaged. Engaging with them. Finding out what's going on. Because there's more to this than I thought. It's more complicated than I thought.
Tom, I've always said that if you want to know how to raise children, talk to someone who's never had it.
There you go.
They can tell you all about it.
That's right. Y'all, our son was hard. Dana must have read an entire library of how to be the world's best mom. And none of them, it was just hard. It was just hard. And it took a long time. Now he's a good guy. You'd love to have him as your neighbor. But boy, there in the middle of that, we weren't sure. We weren't sure. But we stuck it out. We stayed with the curve. Right? Stayed with that.
Get any advice from anybody else?
Yeah, freedom. Here's, just do this. Everything would be better. Yeah, that's right. The only thing, Charles, I found that worked was stamina. Ecclesiastes, the wisest man ever, said 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him. Brethren, I would just offer to you, you're never as alone as you may feel. I will tell you, for me, the hardest thing in life is to ask for help. Maybe that's just me, but I doubt it. And part of that is because in our family, in our families, my family, Dana's family, our collective family, our kids, especially as we moved into adulthood, largely it's fallen on Tom and Dana to fix the problems. Not complaining, I mean, that's just been life. That's how it's played out. So we're the ones people look to have the answers and the assets to fix stuff. And so what that's done for me is it's trained me over the years that other people have the right to ask for help, but I don't. And I would tell you that that's not accurate. That's not. That's why I have you guys. But I have to be willing to ask from time. And for me, that's a hard thing. So what do we do with this? We have to get back to our work. What are we here for? Making disciples, becoming better disciples. Remembering the first commandment. Followed up very closely by the second one. We cannot expect our brethren to give us any more help than we're willing to give. Is that a fair statement? Or we're willing to receive. Is that a fair statement? At one point, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had relaxed some of their laws on a particular part of our operation that I was responsible for. And I talked to this guy out of the regional office in Atlanta, and I said, we're really struggling with this. I'm trying to navigate your rule change. And he's a really good guy. Really, I mean, he was the kind of person you wanted in a regulatory role. And he just laughed at me. He said, Tom, he said, I can't give you any more freedom than you're willing to take. He said, I've given you the rule change that allows you to do these things you've been wanting to do. He said, you're captive to your own mindset. You're not willing to make the change, to step out and take advantage of the rule. Think about my friend's statement there. You're captive to your own mindset. How many of us could have been helped by someone, but we weren't open to the help because we were captive to our own mindset? Likewise, how many of us may have had the opportunity to help someone, but that was the person who never needed any help, and we were captive to our own mindset? Make sense?
That's why you have to constantly be evaluating yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is you get firm in your opinion. Even if it's something about something that doesn't really matter, you can form an attitude, and then it comes back 10, 15 years later, and you still hold on to that, and you're not willing to do something different or respond different. Dangerous.
Now, we live in a society that loves to talk about helping people. But the vast majority of the time, when people in our society talk about helping people, the sentence begins that sounds something like, you know, somebody somewhere ought to go do something. I spent a big part of my life in jobs where I had to wear picture ID badges. You know, I never saw a single picture ID badge that said someone or somebody. It always had somebody's name on it. Someone will never do anything. Who has to do something? We do. Somebody with a name. And we have to do something specific for somebody. It was useless for me to tell Charles, go forth and be ye warm and fed, if I just walk away and do nothing. I got to get engaged. I got to do something. It might entail me having to do something that's a little inconvenient. Because the person with the need rarely brings their need to where we're sitting comfortably so that we can do it within our schedule in a convenient time and place with no effort, right? What are we going to have to do? We're going to have to go to where they are. That can be literal or it can be figurative. Literally, we may have to go where they are. But figuratively, to help them, we got to meet them where they are. How does Paul describe that? Being what? All things to all men. We got to meet them where they are. We all have needs. Precious few of us have the ability to ask for help. He doesn't offer. Let's go back to the beginning. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. For the English majors, where's Jacob? Jacob abandoned me just as I needed him. Because I knew we had at least one English major here. Jake, I need you. Verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. How's it punctuated at the end? Okay. Verse 2, what punctuation mark is at the end? Ah, a period. A period. That's right. Because I needed an English major. I'm not an English major. I'm a knucklehead major. So does that read like a suggestion? Does that read like, if the opportunity provides itself and it's not too much effort?
It's imperative.
Ah, there you go. It's an imperative. Thank you. That word was not coming to me at all. It's a have to. It's a have to.
It's giving you a command.
One of my greatest convictions is that no one will be left out of heaven because it's full and they don't have any more space. There's going to be plenty of room. And one of my greatest convictions is, although we'll have to bear our own burdens and we'll all be judged independently, none of us are going to get there alone. While we will be judged independently, we will march up there arm in arm, holding hands together. Because none of us are that strong independently. The walk is too hard and it's too long. Oh.
I think maybe sometimes taking a more preemptive approach, and before someone is overtaken in a trespass visibly, we can do a better job of empowering that person by asking them to help us
Okay.
and help the church. So I think that some people that have the mentality of always helping others, they never ask or empower any other people to help them with the tasks. And in verses 8 and so on through Galatians 6, it says that you're going to sow what you reap, whether of the flesh, that way, or of the spirit, you're going to reap of the spirit. I think one of the good ways to prevent someone from being overtaken by the flesh is to get them in the spirit and get them involved.
There you go. It's an excellent point.
Gives them encouragement.
Okay, that's a good point to close on. Thank you very much.
Hey, Tom, I got
Okay.
sayings and such. One, you was talking earlier, and it's always consider the source.
That's right.
When someone, but you was talking about the other, there's an important job to be done, and everybody was asked to do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that, because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. Consequently, it wound up, nobody told anybody, so everybody blamed somebody.
There you go. There we go. Let's not be found in that space. Thank you very much.
Hey, girl. Huh? Oh, she's in class. Thank you, I appreciate it.